one morning I wasn't able to get out of bed anymore, and I had no idea how I got there. I felt absolutely no joy at all. I was brushing my teeth that morning, and somehow I felt like almost like a tunnel vision closing in. We know that the mental health recovery journey is sprinkled with uncomfortable truths and moments and dynamics. I've started, I think, 20 plus companies in my lifetime. Many failed. But when I see an opportunity that excites me, I kind of dig my teeth into that. I grew with Paracelsus Recovery. So my own journey is kind of an integral part of that.
And what is Paracelsus Recovery? Jan, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Zurich on the Heart Healing Podcast. It's a real honor to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Jan, what originally inspired you to start Paracelsus Recovery, and what is Paracelsus Recovery?
I'll answer the second part of the question first. So Paracelsus Recovery is a boutique clinic, basically. So it's a mental health clinic that caters to a very small number of clients from an international high net worth, ultra net worth, and executive entrepreneur and entertainment and royalty demographic. And what inspired me, it wasn't so much inspiration, it was more, say, a chance discovery of an opportunity. So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I've started, I think, 20 plus companies in my lifetime. Many failed. But when I see an opportunity that excites me, I kind of dig my teeth into that. And what happened in this case was now a decade and a half ago, that a friend of the family needed very discreet help for his addiction problem. He was quite a very prominent CEO of a listed company. And my stepdad at the time was an addiction counselor, working as an addiction counselor, and my mom's a clinical nurse specialist. And my dad, my physical dad, is a psychiatrist. He came into the picture a bit later on. So basically what happened is my family was asked if we can help this gentleman. And for discretion reasons, he moved into the bedroom at my parents' place, and we got the whole treatment team lined up around him, provided an all wraparound service for just one client. And I immediately realized that's a niche. That's economically, it's an opportunity. Entrepreneurially, it's an opportunity. And it's also a need from a demographic that doesn't really have any other place to go.
Mm. And do you think your desire to get into that space was influenced by having a mother and a father, both who worked because your mother was a nurse, was she originally? Yeah. And then did she move into more the mental health space with that nursing and worked in a clinic before?
She's led elderly care homes and also kind of somatic allopathic hospitals, the nursing side of it before then, yeah.
And your father, what sort of psychiatric?
He was a general psychiatrist in private practice.
Okay. And your stepfather purely specialized in addiction?
So that was his second career. Many addiction counselors, they have any career, then they suffer from an addiction themselves, they recover and find a meaning in that. So he trained as an addiction counselor way before I had already met him. And to answer the question that was there, no, that was not my inspiration. Actually, I like to joke, but it's actually true from what I remember is, during my childhood years and teenage times, when I was listening to my parents at the dining table talking about, my mom's day at the hospital, my dad's day in his practice, I think my reaction was I will never get into healthcare. And it was really kind of later on by chance that I got drawn into this with an entrepreneurship hat on.
And I know that you've had your own experience with your mental health issues, but had any of that sort of cropped up before you sort of started down the road of Paracelsus?
Not in a clinical sense, right? In hindsight, obviously, when we go through that painful mental health recovery journey, we reflect on earlier periods as well. And then, of course, you see, some red flags and some pieces of the puzzle that have led to really hitting that wall decades later. So yes, there were things from childhood and my forming years that impacted that journey. But when we started Paracelsus Recovery, it wasn't really with that experience in mind or any experience in the mental health field. So I brought the kind of the business and entrepreneur side of it to the table, and then I grew with Paracelsus Recovery. So So my own journey is kind of an integral part of that. So when I have my own struggles, I use those experiences to feed them back into improving our offering, and also bringing more compassion and empathy to the table as I felt my own pain.
So you have spoken about experiencing depression and burnout. Will you take us through how that started and what that looked like for you?
From the fuzzy pieces I do remember, should have journaled more at the time. Again, in hindsight, it's always a bit different, right? I can pick out the red flags. But basically, it was a perfect storm of several factors. It happened a few years ago, so it was kind of around the time of COVID and lockdowns and not what, and in the times that just followed after that, where it really got me. So it was a combination of almost losing this business, this clinic, because of closed borders. I was involved in a couple of other ventures that also struggled because of the lockdowns. So it was kind of this real existential fear almost that everything that I've built might fall apart, and so suddenly having this alternative trajectory in front of me, how my life could unfold. I could not imagine to go back into employment and have a boss tell me what to do, right? So that was actually scary. So that was a big component. Another one is, kind of edging towards middle age, and the bigger questions of meaning and purpose that popped up, and me questioning, who am I actually, and do I do the right things for the right reasons? Then my marriage was starting to crumble or falling apart around that's the same time as well. I had also, and I've only considered that later, caught COVID during that period, and I think it was also the start of my kind of brain foggy, bad memory, hard to concentrate times as well. And I think all of that contributed really. And then some other conflicts with a business partner and so on that really, I think, tipped me off the edge in the end. So it's often more than one factor.
And did you go into inpatient treatment yourself?
I did, yeah.
But not, as far as I'm aware, at Paracelsus Recovery.
That's right. Probably couldn't have afforded it. No, and I got that asked, regularly. Why not Paracelsus Recovery? And I can't really. I mean, it's a good clinic, obviously. I'm very proud of it, but it would have been a bit awkward, kind of me as the employer and technically the boss also of the clinicians that work there. Suddenly, and I am quite vulnerable. I try to be open about my struggles and inspire others, that you can come out on the other side. So that it's not that shame component, but it's still different when you really open up deeply and you dig in your childhood. If it's somebody you employ, that you open up to, rather than a therapist at another clinic. I think that was a key component of why I chose to go to another place.
What did your depression look like? Because I think it shows up in so many different ways, and I think it will really help listeners to just hear how you got through each day and how it really did show up in your life.
I think you touch on a very important point there, is that it does really show very differently for different people, and there is probably an average, and then there's also, statistically speaking, then there are the tail ends, and then it can look very different for some people. And I think for me, it looked a bit out of the ordinary. There's no actual term for it. I think it was when I tried to make sense of it, I came up together with my psychiatrist and I guess my internet research and ChatGPT with some kind of term, but it's something along the lines of unusual or whatever. But how did the symptoms look like? So it started off by basically one morning I wasn't able to get out of bed anymore, and I had no idea how I got there. And also now thinking back, I don't know how the months or weeks before then looked like. Obviously, the things I just mentioned, I had a lot of things on my shoulders, and I probably was tired and exhausted, but that I would suddenly one morning just really not have the ability to get out of bed. That was very, very scary. But I knew rationally what it could be, and that I have to really, pull the emergency brake because of everything I knew from my work. So I knew all the theory. So I basically took a break for 2 weeks and went to, for walks in the forest once I made it out of bed again. But I felt absolutely no joy at all. And normally nature is what gets me. I look up, I see the trees and just the magic of this world. And normally it really gives me something, and I felt absolutely nothing. And that's kind of was the next step of the scary experience. So like, and then so after 2 weeks that alleviated a bit, and I was functioning again. I went back to work. I entered outpatient psychotherapy with someone, and then the next half year was kind of a bit touch and go. I mostly functioned with the odd few days where I didn't, and then kind of the final nail on the coffin of my marriage happened during that period, and I think that really then tipped me over. And then it got worse and worse over a few weeks' time. And then when my therapist, I saw her like every 2 weeks or so. When she saw me one day, she was like, "I have to put you on a list for a clinic right now." And then I had to wait for about 3 weeks because there was no spaces available, and that was a terrible time. What's unusual about my experience with depression, that it wasn't so slowly, gradually building over a long time, but it seemed to have hit quite quickly, also alleviated quite quickly to a way where I could function again, and then hit again. And ever since I was in that clinic, and I think that's also somewhat unusual, I came out of it kind of transformed, almost optimistic, because I had decided already when I went in that I would use this as a growing opportunity. So there's optimism was somewhere still there, even if it was buried under pain. And it was kind of a slow, kind of upward stumbling trajectory of recovery. But then I would get those sometimes a few days, sometimes a couple of weeks of really bad episodes, where I could fold within minutes. So I remember it was a bit over a year ago, the last time, and I was in a beautiful place, perfect beaches on a holiday setting, and it was like thrown into my face. I still had a nice dinner the night before, and everything seemed okay. Everything in my life was kind of sorted. And I was brushing my teeth that morning, and somehow I felt like almost like a tunnel vision closing in. It's very hard to describe. And I knew something was off, and I was brushing my teeth, and a minute later I was lying on the ground, and not kind of unconsciously falling, but I just couldn't, emotionally I couldn't stand up anymore. So I put my toothbrush in, and I was lying down in kind of a fetal position, just. And then I spent the rest of the day and the next 10 days on that island. I spent basically alternating between complete apathy, where I couldn't utter a sentence, to horribly crying out my pain. And in between, I tried to get myself up and kind of go for a walk a bit. And from what I understood, that's atypical depression, I think is the term I was looking for earlier. And the really brutal part, was at the time I had a sense of clarity, because my intellect was always there, it functioned. A sense of clarity, a truth that was so much stronger and more overwhelming and truer than the truth that I felt when I was doing well. So normally my truth is, life has a purpose, life is beautiful, there's miracles in small things, and in humans are kind. That's kind of my map of the world. And the truth I felt in the stark moments, the overwhelming truer truth, was this is all for nothing. It's all dark on the other side. There's no meaning, there's no purpose, it's just pain. And as we grow older, we will lose loved ones, we will get more frail and feel more pain physically as well as emotionally. So there's nothing to gain from life. And that's a brutal place to be. So I don't know how common that is, with slower onsets of depression, but kind of thrown into my face like that, was completely unprepared.
I think it's so hard with depression, because I think for someone who hasn't experienced it, they can't understand how you can be in a beautiful place, seemingly having everything in the world at your fingertips. If you're financially solvent, if you have a decent job, if you've got a family, all those things, and what could be wrong? And people used to say to me when I was in a really bad state during COVID as well, just focus on the positive, focus on what you do have, don't focus on what you don't have. But as you say, there's nothing that anyone can say or do, because it's just like, oh, for me, rather than that sort of tunnel vision enclosing your sort of your ability to see the good, for me it felt like this heavy grey cloud that just like followed me around everywhere. And it was just this, if anyone looked me in the eye and asked me how I was, I could feel that sort of frog in my throat, and I literally would just start welling up with tears. And it was just, and it's so hard, depression, because again, it's really hard. It's very hard to treat. And when you're alone, and it does make you feel so isolated and alone. There's nothing that anyone can really do. And even if someone's just there, it's just not really, nothing can help. What do you think made that the latest wave pass?
I think one element was just time. These waves do pass, right? Some people don't survive them. That's the tragic part, right? Because in that moment, basically, the pain can get so strong that some people just don't want to experience that anymore and put an end to that. But these waves do pass, and I think the very extreme kind of peak experience also doesn't last, for too terribly long times. Whereas depression can last for years and decades with ups and downs with some people, unfortunately. I think, and it's hard to tell that to somebody who's in that situation, be optimistic, it will pass, right? Nothing helps in that moment. But I think when we deal with a loved one who is in such a situation, also I myself, I think intellectually, it does help a little bit, somewhere deep down, knowing there will be another day and there will be a better day. And my old self I'm a trained economist, so it's all about statistics and I love to devour the also the research in psychology and neuroscience and not what. I know the midlife is like a low point of emotional well-being anyways, right? So I do remember the great times in my 20s. My life was perfect and I felt it. And I know there is, statistically, there's another wave in, the late 50s and into the 60s and beyond. So kind of, that's an anchor point for me, right? Doesn't mean I don't want to be in the moment now and enjoy life now, but when I don't and everything is really heavy, I just try to focus on that. This too shall pass. And it's almost like a mantra on the really dark days.
And I think, unfortunately, with things like depression, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, it is reminding yourself that this too shall pass, but it's very hard in the early stages when it's a very unfamiliar feeling, knowing that it will pass, because you feel as though, well, I've got no evidence to suggest that it is going to pass. Exactly. And I think as you get further on in your journey, and hopefully the waves get less intense, and in terms of duration, they just last less time. But it's really, really hard to sometimes, when it's a bad episode, to remind yourself that this is going to pass.
100%. And again, that truest truth that I described in that moment, my intellect is fully there, and I know the statistics, and I know my mantras, and I know I had a few experiences already, and I came out on the other side, and I had a beautiful experience of life occasionally on better days. But in that very moment, it's all completely meaningless. I still like to think somewhere deep buried that insight or knowledge helps me through that period. But in that very moment, it just seems, everything's just black and dark and there's no hope.
Yeah, in some ways, it's much better to practice that sort of ability to disconnect and to observe your thoughts from a distance, and to be like, okay, I'm in a ruminative mindset, I'm in a depression right now. And actually to be able to remove yourself so that you have that bird's eye view of just actually being able to observe your thoughts. And they call it thought diffusion in some places, and you just sort of watch your thoughts trickle away on a river or go up on a cloud, or watch them on a film screen. And actually that can sometimes be really powerful, because if there's one degree of separation, it's something like, I am not my thoughts.
Absolutely. But it starts with awareness and insight, and then with practice, because even with that knowledge that's a tool, you need to practice that tool for it to be at your disposal, right? And when you're in that moment of complete darkness, to then actually remember, or to actually have the strength to actually, okay, I need to use this opportunity now to basically practice to remove myself by one level. It's tough, right? And I think if you just find that little strength to remind yourself of that, and just be like, okay, I'm just going to do that. Like, for another example, when I could just not get out of bed, those 2 steps to out of bed to open the window and take a breath of fresh air, it felt like an unsurmountable task, basically, right? But I could get myself to do that, maybe not in the first few hours or even the first day of an episode, but at some point, that's when you manage to do that, you can pull yourself out of that a little bit, and you gain agency back over the situation. So I think that's all you can sometimes do in those moments, right? To do those little baby steps and then remember them the next time around, and then practice.
Yeah, and it is all about accruing that evidence and showing yourself, okay, yesterday I managed to take 2 steps, maybe today I'll take 3 steps, or maybe I won't take any, but maybe tomorrow I'll be able to take 3. It's those very incremental steps. And I think that is, again, the issue, is like people expect this complete transformation overnight, and it just doesn't work like that at all. And again, on my mental health journey, like, oh my God, if you had told me 20 years ago that I'd be sitting here in the state that I'm still in, I would be like, oh my God, like, I'm giving up now. But actually, it's amazing to see when you look down the mountain how far you've actually come, and there might be a way to go up. But that's life, right? We've never got it all figured out, and no human, I don't think, ever feels like they've reached the summit of what is life, because
Absolutely.
There's always a destination that we're sort of striving for, and that destination always moves further and further away. And that's almost what brings life its purpose and its color, because if we didn't, and you reached the destination age 40, it would be all kind of quite boring from then on.
It would be. I think the issue is that we tend to project our happiness into a future specific moment when we've reached, X, Y, or Z, a certain external achievement, right? A house or a level of wealth or a career step or something. And then suddenly, everything will be figured out, and we'll feel peace in our minds. Some of that's very strong human tendency, and even intellectually knowing that it's not the case, I still catch myself, chasing after, wealth or certain achievements, and then the other part of me laughs when they're like, come on, you should know by now, right? And then more often, again, that's with practice. It's kind of almost like a mindfulness practice, catch yourself in that thought pattern, and then remove yourself from the level, observe what's happening right now. And then I say, okay, so that's, my ego, probably self-esteem, then there's a dopamine. So, when I chase an investment or a material outcome or something, so I can really pull it apart and see what's happening, and that helps me to kind of gear myself towards a more sustainable way of being.
No, it's so true. And I actually think, there's always that little voice in our heads that says, yes, but when I achieve this, then I really will be happy. And so actually be able to answer back to that little chimp that sort of answers back to the voice that says, look, you're being unrealistic. It's like, no, I really am being unrealistic, because it all comes from within. And when you're young, it's really hard to hear that, because people will say to you, well, it's not about all these external achievements. It's just actually about being able to sit with yourself and being okay with who you are and finding who that person is.
But, I think it's Carl Jung that said life really starts at 40, and before you're just doing research, right? And in a way, I think there's a lot of truth in that. It's almost like if you tell a small kid not to touch the stove because it will hurt, what happens, right? They will have to touch the stove. And I think it's the same if you tell people in a certain phase of their lives that there is no fulfillment or not that kind of fulfillment they project into certain achievements, they will still go out and chase those achievements and have to find out for themselves. I think the conversations that we are having here, and that need to be held more openly, it's just that when people then arrive at that stage and then they feel unfulfilled or even disappointed, maybe, that this is an experience that many people share, and they're not alone in this, because I think a lot of high achievers, particularly, whilst building their career and their wealth and status, they also build a persona that's somewhat, they feel they have to upkeep, because their friends, their business partners, often also their romantic partners, they know them as XYZ, the high achiever. And then when they suddenly get to a certain level, and I think when things fall apart materially, then that's even a worst case scenario. But even if they reach that certain threshold, and then they feel they're there's still that void that they try to fill. Who can you confide in? Because you built this facade, and then you project that everybody just likes you because of who you project to be, or the facade that you keep up, and that's that's an increasingly lonely place to be. And I think the conversation we're having is important for people to understand who are in that situation. So they've touched the stove, and then they realize, okay, now there is a place you can go, or there's people you can talk to, and you're not alone. I think that's a very important message. People will still have to touch the stove.
No, you're so right. And we only learn from our mistakes. Otherwise, life would be a lot more straightforward. You spoke about that sort of semblance of hope that remained sort of alive in the back of your mind. And I think for some people that does just completely diminish, and it sort of very quickly fades, and they do lose all hope. And that's when things really are down. I think that can tip into suicidal ideation and things. What do you think kept that semblance of hope alive?
Me personally, I'm grateful that I think I'm a born optimist. And from what I remember, I did have, a loving childhood. So that's, privilege that many people don't have. And I don't know in which place I would be, or honestly, if I'd still be here, if I didn't have that asset that kept my little spark of flame alive somewhere, even deeply buried in pain. But I think it was there most of the time, or it wasn't out for too terribly long. But that's, kind of intellectual approach that you just mentioned earlier, when you try to argue with yourself, right? I think especially with a certain intellect, it can get very hard, because the dark side has an arsenal of arguments why there is no point to life, right? That's what I experienced. It's like I battled basically the devil and the angel on my shoulder, and they were both throwing arguments at each other. And the dark part, or the dark side, can be extremely eloquent and really pick everything apart, because a lot of the happiness in life and the fulfillment we get from various activities or relationships or places, it has this kind of untangible air to it, right? It's not. It's hard to make a hard case why it's beautiful to walk through a park. It's just a feeling, right? But the other side is really, it's weaponized arguments why it all makes no sense. So that was my experience. I had this almost internal dialogue sometimes, and that sometimes the dark side would actually win at the end of the day, and there would be another dark day the next day.
Yeah. And I do think it's that anhedonia, as you've spoken about, just that inability to feel any joy or pleasure that can be just, oh my God, it grates your soul. Because again, when I've been in stages of just not, literally, you could have just given me the nicest dinner or taken me to the nicest place in the world, and it would have just all been grey. It was just like nothing brings you that joy. And it's so hard to shift that mindset and to wait for it to pass at times, because you're just like, seriously, I'm just really slowly giving up on life. What do you think really helped, if you were to identify the three main things so for your latest episode of depression? What do you think really, as well as obviously just sitting with it and with time, what helped you while you were in it?
Again, I think the biggest component was time, and certain things just kind of coming back into balance. So not anything I did proactively. I think that was probably in a way the largest component, because I'm intellectually curious, and also because I work in this field. I tried various things myself. I tried psychedelic assisted experiences. I spent a few weeks in India in an Ayurvedic clinic with all the kind of panchakarma Ayurvedic treatments, to kind of rebalance my neurotransmitter system and all that, and a lot of small tools that are readily available, from regular exercise to got a dog 1.5 years ago, and a cat, and we know pets are good. I try to eat healthy, so it's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. I think that's kind of slowly helped me to get things back onto track. Possibly medication would have made a difference, or got me stabilized faster. In hindsight, I think it could have been a way at the time. And though we do work with psychotropic medication, and I've always been of the opinion that, there is a time and a place. It just has to be embedded into a strategy. It shouldn't just be prescribed and then, off you go and see once a month or once every few months, and kind of no end in sight. But as a supporting factor through a hard phase. But for some reason, I know I was scared or didn't feel ready, or it felt like if I take, antidepressants now, I would just delay the problem, because at some point you should come off again, and that can be, then all the emotions come back. That was kind of the fear I had. So I was at all costs, I was trying to keep that option at bay. At some point I knew I just, like when I came back from that beautiful island, I knew I had two options: either call my psychiatrist and get prescribed antidepressants, or, and that was my alternative, I found somebody who works with psilocybin, which is a psychedelic substance. And the research now is, it's progressing at light speed, right? It's we will very soon see that treatment modality as part of mainstream psychiatry. And it did make a difference for me. It was kind of the turning point in that very bad phase.
We've done a few episodes on psilocybin, and it is, I've done a few ceremonies myself, and I think in a supervised environment, it can be immensely powerful. And it's the way that it shakes up the brain. It almost, and if you're stuck in a rut, and I describe it as your brain's on a bit of a stutter, it's sort of developed this stutter and you just can't get past the stutter. And it just helps to redistribute the energy, and, all the neural pathways just slightly reconfigure. And it's really exciting where that's going. But obviously not everyone has access to it, and it's mired in political controversy at the moment, which is sad. But yeah, I think, as you've spoken about before as well, I think it will become much more mainstream in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully. I'd love for you to, tell us again, I don't know, rephrase that. Do you think being alone when you're depressed is a bad thing? Do you think, did you find the company of people helpful, or was that, because for me, definitely, I think when I spend too much time alone, when I'm experiencing a wave of depression, it's definitely not healthy, because I get very, very stuck in my thoughts.
Yeah. I think there's probably not one right way, right, for everybody. And my experience was that it being around people, but the right kind of people, I guess that makes a difference, right? I think what helped me most is, what definitely wouldn't have helped, is people telling me to get my act together, or you just kind of suck it up, and or even. And there were some mild attempts, or there are attempts for, with mild encouragement to go for a walk, and when I really just couldn't do a thing. And I felt that was quite counterproductive. Basically, I felt good in a company that, with people close to me, just held a safe space for me. So they would bring me food, they would have a loving presence, but not even engage, into too much conversation, really just being there. And I wouldn't have been in a position to have a straight or to actually have a proper conversation during some of those moments, right? Because the brain couldn't produce proper sentences anymore. But then company, in terms of, like, you have to socially function, either in an office or a work environment, or socially, or even taking public transportation. I remember I had almost a panic attack on a tramway in Zurich. And my intellect was sitting there and observing it with curiosity. And I was like, but it still feels horrible. Anything that's asked of you, kind of not being yourself and kind to you, and just being with you, any act you have to perform can be very quickly massively overwhelming. So I think it's really loving, quiet presence of someone that, for me personally, did the trick. Because being completely alone, and you're absolutely right, that's also a bad place to be, right?
No, and you're so right. It's just someone, it's actually just having that human that's prepared to just sit with you through it. And you don't want to be challenged. You don't want to be confronted. No advice, because it feels patronizing. It's like, you just don't get it. Like, just shut up.
And also things like comments like, tomorrow will be another day, or this too shall pass in that very moment.
No, you're just like, just please shut up and just
Exactly.
like let me just wallow in my sort of in
Yeah.
depression for now. And I remember that, as a 28, 29-year-old, just having to sleep with my mum like every night. I just needed someone. I could not sleep. I had really horrible bouts of insomnia, and I just needed her there. And it wasn't that she would say anything or do anything, but it was just, again, it was this fear of being left alone. It was kind of, and for me, it then, so, I mean, it was also enmeshed with codependency and stuff as well. But it is just having that physical presence of a human that I think can sometimes energetically be really useful and powerful. And I think for people listening who have a loved one who's going through a depression, it's just really powerful just to be there. And as you said, just to help with the practical things that feel overwhelming, like getting your food, preparing food, whether it's just like, I don't know, helping around with like just various household chores. It's those kind of things. Washing your hair can just feel overwhelming. I remember just, the thought of having a shower or a bath and like washing it became this huge ordeal. It was like, oh my God. But they're momentous occasions and they're to be celebrated when they happen. But you have to build yourself up to them, and trying to explain to sort of a non-depressed person that that's what you're doing today. That's today's goal. Like, what are you on? But
now, like you said earlier, right? If you haven't experienced it yourself, it's quite an intellectual exercise trying to understand what might be happening with that person, and it feels very alien. It's because it's not sadness, it's not having a bad day. It's really neurologically the system shutting down. And the scene I described earlier, where I was lying on that beautiful hotel bathroom floor with my teeth half brushed, it would be probably half an hour until my wife found me. And I was just lying there crying, not functioning, and but intellectually fully there, not like out of it or kind of drunk or anything like that, but still no ability to even call for help or get up. It's just kind of sitting with that deep darkness. And I think what's important, you mentioned, for people who have or experience a loved one going through such a period. I think for one thing, what you say, that's extremely important. At the same time, I think it's also, and I experienced that also with a loved one before it happened to myself. I saw what was happening. Obviously, I was not prepared to help that person adequately. So I was like, you should see a therapist. That was and obviously that didn't land, right? But what I could have done, what I didn't do, and what I encourage everybody to do who are in such a situation, you can ask, mental health professional for advice how to deal with your loved one. And I think that's an option that's very often overlooked. It's yes, we can find advice on the internet and all that, but it's also a very scary and lonely place to be if if your better half or your kids or your parents are in a situation like that, and you're basically in a role of a caretaker for them suddenly, but you don't know what to do. You're not a trained mental health professional, so to then seek help or advice for yourself, I think, is an often overlooked asset that is out there.
Because you were relatively newly married, weren't you, to your wife when that latest wave hit? How did she cope?
It was very, very, very tough for her. We had many times when we discussed her experiences through my various phases. But I think in that moment, she switched into kind of a functioning mode. Luckily, my phases were never too terribly long in such an acute state. So, after, I think the longest again was 10 days or 2 weeks, which is long. But because we were on that, pretty private island away from everything, we just kind of sat through it. And then when episodes came again and again, she also at some point felt very annoyed and almost angry at me and at life, that, why does this have to happen again? Why is she put into that situation again? And I think that's also, and the reason I mentioned that, because these are very human feelings, and I'm very grateful that we can talk about it so openly in our relationship. Because often when somebody is put into a role of a caretaker, the first time around, yes, it's often love and compassion, and often kind of almost self-sacrifice. People will go all the way to give up their own job to take care of a loved one who needs sustaining support over a longer period. But at some point, that can also lead to anger and frustration. especially when you put yourself into full service of your loved one, and being open about that reality. Obviously not somebody who is, don't tell somebody who's in a deep phase of depression that you're angry with them for what they're doing to you, right? But in between and afterwards, having that conversation with them, but especially with loved ones or your therapist or with friends, these are normal feelings to have, and it's important that you have a platform to process those as well as a caretaker.
And it's not like the sufferer is unaware that they're having an impact on their loved ones, because I mean, of course you feel awful, but unfortunately the depression outweighs the ability to be able to stop the depression in order to help your loved one who's clearly spiraling because of your issue. And that can be something really hard to navigate.
It's very complex, right? The storm of emotions that then go through one's head. I mean, that was my experience as well. There was one part where I felt sorry and sad and ashamed for what I do to my loved ones. At the same time, there was also, and that's what depression can do as well, right? At least it was my experience. It's like, but you have no idea what pain I'm going through. This is so much worse than everything you can ever imagine. So, kind of poor me.
Yeah.
And then also when somebody basically doesn't give you the kind of attention that, I know, your psyche tells you that you need or you deserve, you can also get angry at people and lash out. I think that's, it can also happen with depressed people, right?
Massively. Yeah, no, usually. So I would love to move on to talk about Paracelsus Recovery, because I think listeners will be intrigued to know more about the clinic, what it does, who the typical clientele, we've touched on it, but what sort of a typical day looks like. So what makes Paracelsus Recovery unique from other treatment and recovery centers?
That alone is probably a 2-hour conversation, but trying to put it in a nutshell. So what we've conceived of this concept, I think, of a holistic or 360-degree approach to mental health. Traditionally, it's psychiatry and psychotherapy. And then soon 2 decades ago, and again, that's more my mom's invention or brainchild than mine. I just helped her to kind of bring it onto the road, was that there's so much more to mental well-being, both preventatively but also in acute situations and on the treatment side. So for instance, the whole functional medicine part, it's from hormone imbalances, neurotransmitter levels, gut health, inflammatory markers, and a lot of it has to do with lifestyle and nutrition. So we introduced that into mental health treatment, diagnostics and treatment, and so we pioneered that, and then now there's more and more offerings across the world. Unfortunately, still mostly only in privately available, because insurance schemes in no country realize that it's actually a worthwhile investment, because it will save a lot of costs later on. Because well, we know mental health is a chronic thing, right? And it gets quite expensive over the decades if it's not addressed properly. So I think that's one big thing that sets Paracelsus Recovery apart. Really, we realize that any emotional pain, and then the way we humans deal with it, be it depression, anxiety disorders, or medicating it, and then it is developing into a substance use disorder and so on, there's underlying issues. And they can be physical. So some things that I did mention, there can also be a kind of a genetic predisposition to some degree. There's lifestyle factors. There's past trauma. There is personality disorders that then lead to other things, like ADHD, bipolar, and so on, to kind of more severe, in quotation marks, psychiatric disorders that then people self-medicate, and then again it can turn into an addiction. But there's also social factors. There's social and cultural context can play a role if that's not in line with our authentic self. So we play a role every day for others, and that disconnect that can really lead to mental health issues as well. So addressing all that, identifying all that, and devoting really a lot of resources to understanding what are these triggering factors, what are these underlying reasons for somebody's pain and suffering, and then treating not just the symptoms, but actually working on that root cause and helping people process that and either come to terms with it or learn new skills how to deal with things that are just there. That's what really sets that approach apart. The thing is, it's very resource intensive. So, and that's the, the sad part of it. There's no way kind of economically that this can be made available for a broader public who would so much benefit from it and deserve it.
I think this biopsychosocial model, which is what you're basically referring to in more detail, is we know now is at the core and the root of so many of these mental health issues. And I think before it was completely neglected, the fact that the bio and social was it was the psychological sort of factors that were really the main thrust of treatment. And actually we know that if we don't treat all three in tandem, you're just going to go out of a clinic and you're going to relapse immediately, because that's been my experience anyway. And I think that's the trouble. And as you say, it's very resource intensive, and that's why we can't really afford to do it on a bigger scale. But it's really tragic, because you see the rate of relapse that arises from most of these recovery treatment centers, and it's really dire. I think when I went in for an eating disorder, the rate of relapse was something like 95%. And I mean, the 5% that sort of would get better, it's like, do they truly get better, or do they just manage it?
And would they have got better anyways? I mean, these are all the big questions, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that nobody has invented a silver bullet when it comes to mental health treatment. That's why I think the best shot we have is kind of multi-factor, multidisciplinary. And even if that's, kind of a very rough approach, but you at least you push some of the right buttons, then that's better than a kind of very single-dimensional approach like psychotropic medication and maybe a bit of therapy here or there. The fact is, mental health is so complex. I mean, we don't understand the half of how our brain works, right? And even a conversation recently with a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist who was on our medical advisory board, and I asked him so many specific questions. He was like, "I don't know. We don't know." I was like, "I thought we know much more today about how the brain works." And connecting that with our emotional reality, I think that's the thing, right? We understand certain pathways, and we know exactly what molecule does what. But how that translates into actually our emotional reality, that's still a big mystery. So it's a bit of like fishing in the dark. So we have to work with kind of evidence-based approaches. And so we've also at Paracelsus Recovery, I've introduced, from day one, we worked with yoga and acupuncture. Now that's mainstream in mental health treatment. Back then it wasn't. Introduced all sorts of things like equine assisted therapy and breath work, and so a lot of movement, therapy or creative stuff, or stuff that you do physically. I think that's one thing that's often overlooked or undervalued in mental health recovery is, you don't always have to sit and process your feelings and and talk through them and experience things again. Our body is a vehicle to healing or recovery that you can go through purely physical approaches, and there can be amazing healing outcomes, or it can contribute, let's say, that way it can really complement or supplement more traditional mental health treatment approaches.
Yeah, I think Bessel van der Kolk's great book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's amazing how all this somatic work is becoming slowly more mainstream. But it's taking time, and a lot of people dismiss it because they want that psychological intervention that's suddenly going to change you overnight. And it just, as we've discussed, it just doesn't work like that. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and there might be 1,000 pieces in that puzzle. And I used to think that there was going to be one doctor or one type of therapy that was going to be that silver bullet. And it's just not the case. It's this incremental approach, and it's building and slowly stacking on each different component of, and that can be so different. And 1 year maybe talking therapy might get you so far, and then maybe for the next 3 months breath work is actually the thing that you need. And it's really tuning into what you need at a particular time that I think is sometimes the most powerful thing to do, because it's hard.
That's exactly my experience. And I think that's very important for listeners who are in that situation to also understand. I've experienced a few times that when, again, another phase hit or things went downhill again, and I thought I had figured it out with my previous treatment. Like once, for instance, when we got a golden retriever puppy, right? And then for a few months, I was fine. I was like, and there is research that, having a dog helps against depression. So I was like, okay, that was my remedy. And then another phase came. And I was like, for a moment, lost all hope. Obviously, if you've done, I've tried breath work, so, and it really helped. And then at some point, depression came back. And breathwork just didn't get me out of it, or didn't help, or I didn't have the energy to do it much. Then there was the puppy. Then there was all sorts of experiences, and always when another phase hit, it felt like back to square one. And I think for people who experience that, what you're describing, which is also my experience, it is very important to keep that in mind. It is a journey. Like life is a journey. Recovery from any mental health condition is a journey, and it can be tough news because there's no silver bullet, and it can be sometimes years more of stumbling and struggling ahead possibly. But with all those different tools available, there's also an array of things that can be tried out, and some of them help for a few weeks or a few months. Others are there to be rediscovered later on. Like I know I tried yoga many years ago. I just rediscovered it a few months ago, and it's amazingly helpful. And suddenly, it's again my tool of choice. And I think the more tools you have in your toolbox, you understand. Okay, when I feel like this, what can immediately help? For instance, is this or that? Like when I put on loud beats and I just shake like silly dancing. That can be a 2 or 3 minute time frame that completely resets my own emotional reality. It helps more with kind of anger, frustration, or anything like that, but also with a very low mood, like when I have trouble to get out of bed in the morning. I was like, okay, today might be a slightly depressed day. I learned to listen to myself in the morning, and to listen to my emotional reality, and actually take that moment to check in. And then I can decide, okay, my day will probably go like this if I just stumble through my morning routine now, or I take one of those tools out of my toolbox and I do a 10-minute breath work exercise again, or put on music and I shake, or I do my 20 minutes of yoga. And that's no 100% guarantee that my day will go well, but it increases the likelihood by probably multiple.
And I think you're right, and it's knowing what you need, which is part of that. So the skill in getting better and better, and actually the dips then don't last as long, and they might not sink as low as they once did. And it's knowing that, again, in the back of your mind, you've got that bank of evidence. It's like, okay, this is going to pass, but what can I draw on today that's going to change that trajectory? Do you think that part of why you decided to start Paracelsus Recovery, which was really aimed at ultra high net worth individuals, was because you wanted to give them such a wide offering, and that just wasn't going to ever be able to be available to people who couldn't afford that level of care?
Actually, it was the other way around. So it was really, so we got clients from that demographic. Obviously, if you have, you put together a whole team to take care of one person, that already requires quite a high price tag just to kind of pay for the basics. And then people from that demographic, they tend to have certain requirements when it comes to comforts and amenities and services. And then we realized, okay, since we have such quite a high price tag, to add additional treatment modalities and spend a bit more time investigating certain details of their health, with not increasing the price by too much, we can do like a whole epigenetic panel, for instance, and understand a lot about kind of predispositions for certain things to work or not work. That in a kind of traditional kind of public healthcare system setting would break the bank for that specific person. For us, it was just a kind of a little add-on for a patient. I think it did develop out of that. So the treatment approach that we offer became more and more comprehensive over time. And also it was really, again, it was my mom's experience in various clinical settings, and also she was quite engaged in, you know, kind of policy and advocating for a better healthcare system, to understand, or the understanding that healthcare medicine is traditionally very fragmented. There's a lot of experts, but only in their narrow field, because it, even like the best cardiologists, who's really good at that specific field, they cannot look left or right for too much, because there's just too much information out there. So connecting all of these dots, that is what's really crucial, and what makes a massive difference. So this interdisciplinary within the medical discipline.
And presumably for each, so you have, I believe, how many are there? 5? Is it 5 people at a time you can have at the clinic?
3.
3, only 3. And so they each have their own designated apartment, and it's completely sort of, they're all completely separate. They don't do any work together.
Yes, that's right.
And they have a team assembled around them that's completely bespoke.
Yeah. Each one has actually a healthcare professional, a senior healthcare professional, doing nothing but coordinating. So we have one clinical coordinator, either a clinical nurse specialist, or one of them is a medical doctor. And they don't treat, they really just coordinate, connect the dots.
And how much say does the client have in their treatment plan? Because in my experience, like treatment centers, one of their things is about letting go of control and actually surrendering to the process. Is that something that Paracelsus Recovery also adheres to?
No, it's actually, it's an area that is gives rise to tensions and struggles on a daily basis, because our average clients are used to know what they want and get what they want, and they pay quite a bit of money to come to us.
What is an average? So average week, what does it cost?
Around £100,000 per week, all inclusive. And that is a lot of money. It's also a lot of money for somebody who's very wealthy. So they obviously ask for value for money, right? And then we know that the mental health recovery journey is sprinkled with uncomfortable truths and moments and dynamics that are just part of that journey, because we have to unearth pain and also hold up a mirror sometimes and, you know, call out certain or address certain behaviors that might not be constructive to one's own emotional well-being or recovery. But as we all know, the ego can be quite defensive and strong and create your own reality. So, you know, having, I know, a self-made billionaire on the therapist's couch who are used to have a horde of yes-sayers around them, and reality proved them right. They always knew better because they built this billion-pound empire, to actually then navigate their reality with the reality that we see, and also, you know, with all the psychological research and the clinical evidence that's out there. And at the same time, these are very unique. I mean, every human being's journey is unique, but those very kind of high achievers, sometimes also very high-profile people, those are very specific realities that you cannot just translate one to another. So it takes a lot of experience and adaptability from a therapist's side to help a client navigate that. So it's tricky, right? The structure is important. We know for mental health recovery. But if somebody just says, yeah, well, you know, I'm hungry now, I want my lunch now, and they will probably pack their bags and be pissed off if the chef doesn't produce a beautiful meal within an hour or half an hour, because it's not a recommendation from a kind of treatment structure perspective. Then we have to navigate that. And so it's, you know, sometimes it's that side that wins. Sometimes it's us just making very clear this is not good for you, and we cannot in good conscience adhere to your wish right now. So it's a dynamic that we experience every day, and that's definitely, you know, has much more power in our clinic than it would have in any other treatment setting.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's a real juggling act, because Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who checks himself into a clinic, they want to get better, but there's then that very strong disordered voice in their head that also wants to stay unwell in a way because that's what's familiar and that's what feels safe and that's what they're sort of used to. So it's, yeah, and anyone, again, like, anyone in treatment kicks up a fuss because, there's that saying, isn't there, that, you're only ready to get better when the fear of staying the same outweighs the fear of the change, and stepping into that can be terrifying, but it's being able to navigate that alongside them. And it's hard when money talks because it sadly does.
And we cannot, separate the treatment that we offer from the hospitality and the services, right? So it's all kind of one thing. We one clinic, a high-end clinic, Paracelsus Recovery. So if the psychiatrist or the psychotherapist is very strict with the client, that's immediately taken by them and then projected on the whole experience with the clinic. So as you say, if money talks, and these are customers who only stay at the best hotels and often fly private, and they're really used to everybody immediately jumping when they utter a wish, and that's in a way in conflict often with how a best treatment setting would look like. At the same time, we also realize that we can lose them quite quickly if the anger boils up too much, and again, that's often a defense mechanism. We see it for that, right? It's the ego not wanting to go into that pain, and then it's easy to project. Kind of, I know housekeeping didn't do a proper job today, so they can get all hung up about housekeeping, even though they pay 15,000 for that day, and they lose many hours by being angry about something rather than working on their childhood trauma, for example. But telling them that's currently we see this behavior, that can make it even worse. So navigating that on a daily basis, that's really the challenge.
How do you train your staff in dealing with these ultra high net worth individuals?
Not really. So it's more selection.
Yeah.
So to rather than training. So I always say proudly that the key or the main recruiting criteria to work with us is to have the heart in the right place, and then to have your diplomas and your experience and your clinical license and all of that, because it really takes a very compassionate human to be able to work with this demographic when they're when people of power and wealth are in a lot of pain. All things equal, not with all of them, but very often we see that. One of their coping mechanisms is to lash out and to kind of order things. It's kind of taking control. We all know that when we feel out of control somewhere, we try to grab control elsewhere. That's just how our subconscious works, right? And we deal with that on steroids, basically. So it already takes a certain mindset and ability of compassion to actually be able to do that work. And then I just remind them, and also myself, on a daily basis when we face challenging situations with clients, that we remind ourselves that these are human beings and often very painful, kind of almost hopeless realities, and they just try to hang on for dear life, and that can take all sorts of forms, and it can be projected towards us. And it's not like that every client gives us a hard time, or it's on a daily basis, but it does happen, and when it happens it can come with full force.
What does a typical day at Paracelsus Recovery look like?
There's no such thing as a typical day, right?
I knew you were going to say that.
we really do tailor treatment to every single client, and because one client's treatment schedule doesn't impact another client's, we can be very flexible there. But there is a template where we start from, right? And it's basically, you would have breakfast with your live-in therapist. So we have every client has a therapist that stays with them in the same residence and is there 24 hours. So they would normally share meals together. So already over breakfast, you can discuss how was the sleep. They maybe late night message from your business partner or your spouse, kind of keep you awake, or and then will be throughout the day will be just different treatment modalities from a massive toolbox. So the psychiatrist could drop by for a long session. It's normally 90 minutes or more. Then there could be a therapeutic massage or a yoga or a breathwork session. Then soon it's lunchtime. Sometimes then, we go to partner clinics when, for instance, when somebody needs to go to a sleep lab or have full body MRI, things like that. So we do a lot of the more resource intensive medical diagnostics and treatments we do with partners. But it's really full day. It's like 10 hours plus every day, and a bit of leisure activities in between on the weekend. Switzerland's beautiful, so people can do excursions and so on, but it's exhausting. So it's because we know mental health recovery takes a lot of cognitive resource and energy from the patient, right? So after a few weeks, it's people need a break from the break, really.
And how long does the average patient tend to stay for?
The average is about 6 weeks. We do have very short programs, like 1 week executive detox, as I call it. But we're very transparent that this is, it's something that was decades in the making. It's not fixed in 1 week, right? Even a 4 week or 6 week stay with us, I consider it kind of intense intervention / stabilization phase. And a lot of the important work also happens afterwards.
And do you send a team back with people ever to help with the integration?
We can, and we do, and very often it's recommended. And there's definitely I see very clear correlation of sustainable outcomes with people who take a live-in therapist with them for at least a few weeks to help through that transition phase. With somebody who's been in that position for 7-8 years now in the Middle East, who went with the client back and just stayed there for ongoing support.
Wow. And where do you see Paracelsus Recovery going in the next few years? Do you want to expand, or do you just want to refine your offering and keep doing what you're doing?
Just get better at what we're doing. I don't want to grow capacity, because I very strongly believe, even though there is demand and there's rising demand, and there's also more offerings, in that price level internationally, but you cannot do justice to what you promise to these clients if you scale too much. So I think more than capacity of 4 patients, we would have to completely replicate the whole organization to really stay true to that promise. So I'd rather do things right and at scale.
Jan, it's been such a fascinating conversation, both personally and professionally, and I'm very grateful, and I hope we'll have another opportunity to speak soon.
Thanks, Pandora. Appreciate it.